All right, so now we're going to talk about life cycles. So I'm using the same project than before from React Router, and I grabbed the home.js and converted this to a class component. So we are still just getting home, but the only difference is that this one is a class. You should do the same, just change it to a class. So the thing is that I had to change it to a class because we don't get life cycles with functional components just like this. We only get them with class-based components. Okay, so what are life cycles? So we get the ability to know what is happening inside our component when React creates the component and when React updates the component. So these ones are just methods we get available with component. These ones are just like functions that React is going to trigger by default. So we get this life cycles when React creates the component and when React updates the component. All right. So okay, let me just start doing this. So this methods will get triggered when create the component. So what is the first thing that is going to get triggered when we create it? So it's the constructor. So this is the first thing that React is going to use and trigger when we want to access this component and render on the screen, when we are creating the component. And of course, you might receive some props, so we can know this. And I'm going to just create a state, just we can use it later. Right now, we are not going to use it, but just going to leave it ready. So I'm going to create a name of Francis, whatever. All right. So this is the first thing that's going to get triggered in our application. So I can do a console log just like this, console log, and say one and just, say constructor. So we can know that this one belongs to the constructor. So if I go to the application, we get one constructor. All right, that's cool. So what is the second thing that React is going to trigger when it creates the component? So, and it's going to be a little bit weird. It's something called get derived state from props. I know that the name is so weird, but it's just the way it is. So it's static, just like this, and get derived state from props. And yeah, I know, it is weird. So this is the second thing that's going to get triggered. And this is something that triggers when we create the component or when we update a component. Now, it's a little bit weird to understand. It's really simple, but just after you learn the easy life cycles. So I'm going to leave this one empty, and we're going to go back to this much later. So for now, I'm just going to say console log 2, and this one by default needs to return something. So I'm going to say null so we don't get an error message on the screen. That's it. So if I go back to the console log, we can see that first we get the constructor, and second we get the derived state from props. Now, the order of where we put things on the file doesn't matter. If I put this one at the very top, we still first execute constructor and then derive state from props. So again, React will do everything in steps. All right, so what is the third thing that React is going to trigger when we create a component? So it's going to be the render. Yeah, so we've been using lifecycle all along and we didn't know it. So the render is going to be the third thing that will trigger. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to go at the bottom and say 3 and say render. So if I reload this, we get one constructor derived state from props and then the render. And again, the order of things right here doesn't matter. If I put this, we are still getting the render on the third place. All right, so let me go back. So what is the next thing that we're going to get triggered? So it's something called component did mount. So I'm going to open and put it right here. So of course the name makes sense. So after everything got mounted on the screen, your component is right here on the screen and the user is able to see and everything else, React will go and trigger this method. And again, this works just like a callback. This callback, it's letting you know that everything was placed on the screen and everything is ready. So it's gonna trigger this one after everything was rendered. So component did mount. Sorry, after everything got mounted on the screen. So, this one of course goes after the render. And then we get another one that will only trigger if we remove the component from the screen. And this one calls component will unmount. And again, the name makes sense. Whenever we are unmounting the component from the screen, this one gets triggered. So I'm not going to put the step because it's not the step number 5. So if I, of course, reload the application, we still get 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we are not getting the X1. Now, if I go to a different component, if I unmount the home component and try to mount the posts, then we get trigger. All right? So again, these methods are just like callbacks. They are just letting us know it's getting triggered after something happens. When we create the component, we triggered this one. Then we are rendering this one. Everything got rendered, so I'm going to trigger this component. So this is very useful because maybe you need to render something, right? And after everything is rendered on the screen, let me go back to home and reload the application. After everything gets rendered on the screen, maybe you need to make a network request, for example. You're going to go here, make a network request after everything got mounted. If you do it before everything got mounted, remember that the network requests, they take a little bit of time. So you're going to make that network request, but you're not going to get the information on the render because the network request takes some time. And JavaScript, it's going to execute everything and just in order. It's not going to wait for your network request. So if you do it after the component did mount, you're going to get it, and the application will re-render with the data you're getting from the server. Don't worry, I know it's a little bit confusing. The only thing you need to know is that we get some methods with components, only with classes, so we can know what is happening and when is happening in our applications. So all of these methods we get, these life cycles, they get triggered when we create the component, when React is creating the component. We get other life cycles when we update the state of the component or we update the props. All right, let's go to the next one and talk about this, the life cycles we get when we, of course, update a component. All right, so since we can know the steps of when React is creating a component, we can know when something happens to our state or when everything gets updated inside our component. So we get other life cycles just to know this. So let me just add maybe a simple onClick right here. So I'm going to go and say that I want to add an onClick, and this onClick is going to be equal to something. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do open and close, and I'm going to set the state right here. Then maybe we can do something else, but for now, I'm just going to set the state of something new. So we have a state of name, so I'm going to do name, and I'm going to update the state with pretty much the same. So let me do capital F, and I'm going to change the state to junior. So if I do the onClick, maybe I'm going to say change name. So change name. Let me do word wrap. There we go. So if I click on the button, of course, I'm going to update the state. Now I'm going to click it, and this is what we get. We get the derived state from props again, and we get the render again. So the application, of course, is updating the state, and it's going to trigger the 2 life cycles we need to re-render the information if, of course, we are displaying this. So by default, again, it's triggering the derived state from props and the render. And these are the only 2 methods we get that that React is going to trigger when it's mounting and when we are updating. Of course, we're going to go through the derived state from props in a couple minutes, but of course, then we get the render, and we know that this is the one we trigger if we update the information to display the changes. Now, of course, since we get all these life cycles, we get a couple more. So I'm going to remove the constructor. I'm going to remove the console log because right now it's kind of in the way. And the did mount, and I'm going to console log the did unmount, the will unmount. So right now we get the derived state for props and just the render. So we get a life cycle right here, a method that it's going to trigger if we update. This one, of course, shows when we are updating, but it will also trigger at the very beginning when we mount the component. So this method we get calls should component update. This is a new lifecycle we get. So this method will trigger if we update the state or we update the component. So I'm going to do console log, just to console. Let me do it again, console, and then .log. And I'm going to say X, and then let me do X, and should component update. So we can know where or when this is happening. Now the should component update needs to return something. Just like this one is returning null, this one should return true or return false. It's going to return a Boolean by default. So I'm going to say true, and you're going to see why in a minute. So I'm going to go, and of course, we notice that we get the derived state from props and the render. This one is not triggering at all. So if I change the name, then it's going to go to this one. We get the should component update, and then we get the render. So this one happens between this and this. Now, what is the point of this method? And again, the name makes sense. So this one will decide if the component should update or not. That's why we are returning true. If we are returning true, the component will update and it will go and trigger a new render. If we say false, and just let me change it to false and reload the application, I'm going to change it, and we get the derived state from props, the should component update, but we don't get the render. So this one is saying that, we detected an update, and we updated the state, but I'm not re-rendering the application. I'm not going to show the changes. And we can actually do something a little bit more practical than this. But first, I want to show you something else. Of course, right now we are doing set state, and we are updating state to name and Francis Jr. Now, with the should component updates, from the difference from the other ones, maybe not this one, what you get is some arguments. So the first one, it's the next props, and the second one is the next state. Don't worry, I know this is confusing, but you're gonna get it in a minute. So I'm gonna remove the console log for this one, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna console log this arguments right here. So next props, and on the other one, I'm gonna do the next state. All right, let's see what we get. I'm gonna reload the application. I'm gonna do change name, and this is what we get. First, we don't get the props because we don't really have next props. We don't have props. We are not getting props from the beginning. So then what you get is the name. So we do have a name on the state. So we are getting the name. All right, so that's good. So why would we use this? So notice that the next state, it's Francis Jr. is the value of where we are updating. We are changing this to Francis Jr. It's not the previous value. So what you get with this ones is that you can get in an argument the next values of the next update. So what I can do, I can compare this one with that state, and we will get, both values, the previous one and the one we got updated to. So in this one, what you could do, you can do some, some checking. What if I wanted to update the state only if I change it to, I don't know, Steve? So let me just do it right now. You're gonna get it, don't worry. I'm gonna delete this, we don't need it. So every time I click on change, and let me fix it, change. All right, so every time I click on change name, I'm changing the name to Steve. So what we can do with the should component update is that we can decide if we want to, of course, update. So I'm gonna access the next state. I'm gonna do dot. I'm gonna do name. Let me do name. And if the next state it's equal to Steve, the same thing we get right here, I don't want to update. I don't want to re-render. So in this case, we return false. Of course, if the value is something else, we will return true. We will update and re-render the application. So if I reload it and click on change name, we get the derived state from props, but we are not re-rendering because, the rules match. If I do Steve Jr. or whatever and change name, we are re-rendering because the rule will not match. So again, this is something that you get to in between, of course, of re-rendering the application and updating the state, so you can decide if you want to update or not. Now, if you ask me, is this something that we will use the whole time? Well, no, this is something very specific. Of course, I'm just teaching you React, so I need to show you the tools we have available. But in real life, you're gonna use this on very specific scenarios, very specific scenarios. But you need to know, the only thing you need to know is that you have the ability to inspect what is the previous state and the next state and decide if you want to re-render or not. All right, so we get another lifecycle that is very useful. So this one triggers before the render. So we get one that triggers after the render, of course. So this one, it calls component.update. So I'm gonna open and close and put it right here. So I'm gonna say console log and then X and then component did update. Let me just copy this and paste it. All right, so this one only triggers after the component was re-rendered, and of course we are updating. It will not trigger when the component gets mounted, right? We will only trigger if the component it's getting updated and after the render. So if I reload the application, I change the name, we are updating, we get the render, and then the component did update, right? You know, pretty simple. Now, since we know how the other ones work and, you know, the main idea of all of this, just understanding this is very simple. Same thing with this one. We're going to get to this one in a couple minutes. So with the component update, we pretty much get the same arguments we get with should component update. But these ones are different because this one's happen after the render. So instead of getting the next state, we're going to get the previous state because this happens after the updating. So if I go right here to the arguments and we say pref and then props, this one are the previous props. We are not getting props right now, so, you know, I'm not going to use it. We are getting a state. But the props, they work just like doing this pref state. If you're getting new props, you're going to get them right here. So, okay, so we get the previous state. And I'm going to go and console log just to see what we get. First one, I'm going to console log the previous state. And then I'm going to console log that state. All right, so that state. Right, so remember that with this one, we get first, you know, the next state, and then we will get the other one. So we get backwards. So if I reload the application and do change name, we are getting the previous state, and the previous state was, you know, Francis, and then we get the state. So the current state is Junior because we've already changed this. Remember that this happens after the update, right? That's why it's called component did update. That this state, it's equal to the new state of things. And the previous state, what was the old state. So if we do pretty much the same thing right here on the component should update, we will get the same values but backwards. All right, again, this one works just the component did update, and this is something, this works just like a callback. We can catch it after everything is get rendered. We can do some evaluation of what the state is and maybe trigger a function or do something. But with this one, of course, we cannot decide if to re-render the component or not because the re-rendered already happened. All right, so we get one more before we go to the derived state from props. So this one, it's pretty simple. It's called get snapshot before update. And again, the name makes sense. So what we do, we kind of store or create a variable, or actually we can take a snapshot and pass it to the component did update before, of course, updating. Again, I know it makes no sense, but let me just show you. I'm gonna get the props, and we're gonna get the previous state, of course. So on this one, I'm gonna copy and return null, and I'm gonna do a console log of the previous state, and then again from the previous props. Of course, we are not gonna get props. The only thing we get from props is the props from React Router. That's it. We don't have any other props. Okay, I'm gonna comment all the other ones because it's gonna get a little bit weird. So let me see if I can. All right, we're good. So I'm gonna reload the application. I'm gonna change the name, and of course we're gonna get the props we get from React Router, and then we get the state, and then we get the update, right? So this one, of course, it's getting triggered before the call to component did update. And notice we are changing this value to Steve.Jr. And notice again that this is happening after the render. So before going to the update, we are getting a snapshot of the previous state, what was before we changed it. And of course, it's kind of taking a snapshot of that. And of course, we have access to it. So what can we do with this? Because right now, this is useful, but maybe not that useful. What you can do, you can get a snapshot of the previous state, and you can pass it to the component.update. So how can we do that? Let me just give you an example. I'm gonna go and say that I want to create a variable called age. I don't know. And this variable, I want to send it from the snapshot to the component.update. So in this case, what we are going to return is age. Of course, you can return the previous state or whatever value or prop you're getting in your application. In this case, I'm doing something dumb. I'm just returning the age. How can we catch this on the component.update? Well, it's the third argument. If I do snapshot, and I go right here and then console log the snapshot, we're going to get that age value. So snapshot, and I'm gonna reload just in case, change name, and on the component.update we get the snapshot. All right, it's something we could use. Again, if you ask me how many times I've used this one, well, not a lot of times. So it's very specific scenarios. All right, so let's go to the final one, which is this one. All right, so let's talk about the derived state from props. And now that you know all the other ones, or you get the idea of how the other ones work, this one is going to be a piece of cake. The only weird thing about this is just the name, right? Okay, so I'm going to go to this one, and we still get the same thing than the other ones, the props. So we're going to get the props, and we get the state. Why I'm not making next or previous? And it's because this one will trigger every time when the component mounts and when we update. So it's always the current state. All right, so I'm going to go here. And on this one, it needs to return something. Now, if you return null, nothing is going to happen in this one. But if you return an object with the state, it will go and update the state. That's the, what we can do with derived state from props. It will update the state if you returned a state. I know that makes no sense. I'm going to give you an example and you're going to get it. So I'm going to go at the bottom. I'm going to change Steve Jr. to Ron. And now what I'm going to go here and say if. I'm going to just create an if statement. That's it. I'm going to say, okay, so if the state dot name, it's equal to Ron. If you're changing it to Ron, I don't really want to change it to Ron. What I want to do, I want to return a different state. I want to go to the name and do, I don't know, Millhouse, whatever. So what this is going to do is going to catch right here. It's going to, of course, enter here because we are updating to Ron. And it's going to say, oh, okay, so if we are updating Ron, we want to stop right here and we want to update with this one instead. That's it. That's the only thing we need to do on derived state from props. I know it was weird, but if I just explain you this before doing all of this, it was going to be a little bit weird. Now, if I save this, and let me go to the console, to the render, sorry, and console log this state and see what we get. So this.state. So I'm gonna reload the application, and the first time it renders, we get the name Francis. Okay, so if we change it, we are accessing this and we are changing it to Millhouse instead. So we are not even going through the other methods. We are just forcing the change. Forcing the change to Millhouse. So now, let me just stop 1 second. If we go to the documentation about this, let me just show you what the documentation says. So if you go to React and to the docs, and you go to API reference and then React component, if you scroll down, you're gonna get examples and everything that says on the on the life cycles. So if we go to this one, it says this method exists for rare use cases. So they are even telling you that you should not use it unless you really need to use it. Right. So this brings me to the next thing. You must be thinking, dude, I need to remember all of this. Do I need to really remember or know it by heart or by memory? No, not really. Most of the times you will not use these ones. Of course, I need to let you know that you have them available. that you might need to use it on very specific scenarios. Now, you're not going to use most of this, but you're going to use some. For example, the constructor, yeah, you might use it. The derived state from props, maybe not so much. Should component update? Again, maybe not so much. Snapshot before update, I just used it maybe twice or once in my life. Render, well, yeah, of course, you're going to do it the whole time. Component update, not so much, but you could use it and it could be very useful. Then the other ones that did mount, you're going to use it the whole time. And that's it. So the only thing you need to know is what you can do with this ones at least. And when you get into that particular scenario, then you need to go to the documentation and read a little bit more about these methods, these life cycles. But again, you're not going to use them a lot in real life. This is the one that you're going to use a lot, or maybe the component did update. Now we had a lot of other life cycles. Let me see if we can find the documentation. Maybe I get it. So right here, it says, note, these methods are considered legacy and you should avoid them. So before, on the previous versions of React, we were getting a component will mount. This is a method that will get triggered before we mount everything. Now, it's not there anymore. We cannot use it. So the only thing you can use is the component did mount. But you can still use it and it will work. But remember, it's unsupported. It's unsafe. And then we got other ones like component will update and receive props. So these ones are not there anymore. We cannot use them. All right, man. So we're good with life cycles. We're gonna go to the next section and do something else. All right. So now we're gonna talk about something easy. We're gonna talk about conditional rendering, and we kind of did this in this course already, but we're gonna expand. We know what we know right now. So I'm gonna go to components and I'm gonna create a new component called conditional.js. Of course, you can call this whatever you want, doesn't matter. So I'm gonna copy everything I get from posts, paste it right here, and I'm gonna call this conditional, and I'm gonna just create a conditional. And right here, I'm just gonna output conditional as a text, and we don't need the post header. All right. So now, of course, we need to add a route for this so we can show this on screen. So I'm gonna go to index, and I'm going to, of course, import then conditional from / components, and we bring it from conditional. All right, now we need to create a nav. So I'm going to copy the one at the top, and I'm going to say that every time we get conditional, we're going to, of course, go to that route. So conditional. And at the bottom, we need to create the route. So you should know this, of course. So if we go to conditional, we're going to show the component conditional. And let me just copy just to avoid typos. All right. So if we go to conditional right here, we kind of get the component. Very cool. So now, of course, we know that we can render one thing or we can render another. Let's pretend that we have a value, maybe a const called value, and this one could be true, could be false, could be, whatever. In this case, I'm going to say true. Now this could be, and of course let's pretend, this could be something coming from props, or if we had a class-based component, it could be a state, or again, just props. So on the return, what you can do, you can check this with ternary. Now, what we did previously was to add the curly braces. Now, if we are returning something right here, we can not use the curly braces. What we can do, okay, we can use ternary, saying that if the value of something, we're going to return something. If not, we're going to return something else. So in this case, what we can do, we can return just a div saying, hello, it's true, whatever. And on the other one, we're going to do, of course, the opposite. So if I say hello, we could say it's false. And of course, depending on what we get right here, we're going to be rendering one component, or we're going to be rendering a different one. So if I save it, we get hello, it's false. Now, of course, this one works just like any ternary operation. We can say even something like this. If value is equal to false, we're going to say, of course, it's true, because it's not. So let's say that we have a function instead of just a value. So I'm going to delete that one at the top, and I'm going to create a const that calls return and then value. I'm going a little bit fast because we kind of know this. This is just pure JavaScript. So I'm going to go here, and this function, the only thing that this function will be doing is just return a Boolean. Just pretty much the same thing we do with the other, with just a variable. But in this case, we can call a function right here and check if this is true. So I'm going to say, okay, return value, it's true. We're going to get hello, it's true. And if this one, of course, it's false, we're going to be rendering this as false. So again, you can, of course, use something like this. Now, instead of just using this, you could you can use this one on a different function. So let's say that I go right here and I say const and I do show it, right? Just going to do show it. And this one, it's going to be a function that it's going to return something. Now, first I'm going to do it with curly braces. So what we can do, we can copy all of this and we can say, okay, I'm going to, of course, return something, because if you have curly braces right here, this one needs to return some JSX. If we don't do this, it's going to fail. Just let me show you. I'm going to paste it right here, all right? And the only thing we need to do is to make a reference right here to the return. Now I'm going to, of course, wrap everything into a div. You could put a fragment if you wish, doesn't matter. I'm going to say div, open and close. And I'm going to say we want to run show it, right? As soon as the component starts, we can get this. We saw an expression, all right. And it's because we are returning this with curly braces. What we could do, we can go right here at the bottom and say that we want to return, and we return with parentheses, and that's going to work, right? So we kind of get it. So notice that, of course, we are getting false, so we get false. So it's good. Now, another thing you can do, you can remove the return right here and make, if you're just returning some JSX, you can just pass the parentheses, and that's it. That's going to work. One step less. If we reload it, you know, we get pretty much the same thing. We can just kind of know this, right? It's pretty simple. It's just ES6 and a little bit of JSX. Now I'm gonna go right here at the top and change this for a functional component. Sorry, a class-based component. I'm gonna bring component at the top, and I'm gonna show you an example. And I want to show you this because you will use it the whole time. And I'm gonna give you kind of a real-life example. Of course, with fake values, but it's kind of like a real life example. So I want to bring conditional again, and it's gonna extends. Well, it's not giving me the, let me start again. Well, it's not giving me, okay, so extends, let's do it manually. And I'm gonna say component, all right, component, sorry for that. And of course, I'm gonna bring it, oh, of course, it was not giving me the extent. We need to call class, sorry for that. So of course, we wrap everything right here. We pretty much get everything, and I'm gonna just delete this. I don't want it right now. And again, I'm gonna pretty much start over. So I'm gonna go here and export the full conditional. All right. So of course, since we know with class components, we need to render at least something in order for this to work. And on the render, we get the return. So we return something, and I'm just gonna return a div saying hello. Wait, we kind of know this. All right. So maybe this conditional section, it's something that you need to render only if the user, maybe it's authenticated, or maybe only after something gets loaded. So the application kicks in, maybe you're going to make a network request. You're going to check if the user has, a correct token or whatever, but that, going to the server might take a while. And maybe what you want to do is not show the screen while you're fetching the data, loading the data. So you will want to show maybe a loading ... on the screen, or maybe show a GIF, an animated GIF. So, what we need to do is conditional rendering. So I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to say state equals, and then loading, and I'm going to, change it to true. All right. So now later, of course, you will need to decide what to show. If you're loading with the state, you want to show a div saying, loading. And maybe if the loading changes to false, then you want to switch to the other thing that you want to return. Makes sense? So what you could do, you can return several things. Right now, I'm going to do something simple. I'm just going to create an if and an else. That's it. It could be ternary, or it could be a switch, or it could be whatever you want. But you always need to return something on the render. If you don't return anything, just like I'm doing now, then of course you're gonna get this. So okay, so what do we want to check? Well, we want to check if that state is loading. All right, So if this is true, I want to move forward and saying, okay, dude, something like this, you know, if this is loading, we're going to say loading, whatever, ... Of course, this is not going to work because we need to return something the correct way. So I'm going to go and say return, open and close, and I'm going to put the JSX inside of the return. Now, of course, this is going to work, right? So we get loading. So what happens if I change it to false? We go back to the same error. We are not returning anything. So we need to do pretty much the opposite and say returning, or maybe, I don't know, hello, this is the conditional component, whatever, doesn't matter. So of course now it loads and we get, of course, a render of something. Now in the future, you're going to be fetching things. So I'm going to do, you know, a component that mount, and after everything gets rendered right here, we're going to do a request. Of course, we are not going to do a request, but I'm going to do a set timeout. And with this one, we can kind of emulate what happens when we go to the server and fetch it. Of course, we go through a function, and this one takes, I don't know, half a second, maybe a little bit more, so it gives me time to switch screens. So what are we going to do? So I'm going to do this, that set state, and I'm going to change the state back to false. I'm sorry, to true, because we are done fetching the information. So the application reloads. Let me just reload it again. And okay, we get loading, and it's because I made a mistake on this one. All right. So I'm going to say true, and then this one, I'm going to say false. So I'm going to reload the application, and of course, you're going to the server, and whenever everything is done, you're showing the component that you really want to show here. And of course, you could put this on a function or whatever. The important thing right here is that you can decide what to show depending on what's happening on your component. It's really simple to do. Again, render is just a function from React. And the only thing you need to do is to render one thing at the end, to return one thing, just like JavaScript. It doesn't matter if you have many things. As long as you return something, it's going to work. All right. Okay, let's go. So let's go to the next one. I want to talk about something very specific. It's called pure components. Right, so now we're going to discuss pure components. So there's a lot of confusion around pure components, and they are, you know, pretty simple to understand. But the thing is that you need to know what the problem is, and what can you do, how can you resolve it with pure components. So a pure component is just like a component, but it does something else. Now first, I'm going to create a route where I can show you what the problem is. And once you can see the problem, then I'm going to tell you how to fix it. Okay, so first we can need a view for this. I cannot show you the problem without maybe using this. I will need to kind of remove what we've done here. So I'm going to go and create a new component. Of course, if you don't want to, that's okay. The only thing you need to know is what the problem is. So I'm going to call it pure and then comp.js. And since we're here, I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to go to, on the VS Code, I'm using VS Code, and this is the plugin section. When we go here, of course, you're going to get a list of all the plugins you get installed in your computer. This is a new computer, so I need to do a lot of installing, but right now I'm just using this ones. Now, there's one that it's very, very cool. It's called ES7 React Redux Graph React Native Snippets. So what you can do with this one when you install it is that you can type maybe kind of 3 or 4 letters, depends on what you want to do, and it will create a component for you. You don't need to do all the typing. So let me just show you. It says this is the plugin. So I'm gonna close this and I'm gonna go to pure component. So the only thing I need to do right now is to create a class-based component. So I'm gonna say RCC. I press the tab and it will export default and create everything I need for a class-based component. Really, really cool. So I'm gonna use this one, a couple times because again, just typing everything. Now notice that this one will bring you the name of the class depending on what the extension or actually the name of the file is. So in this case, I'm naming everything with the lowercase. If you're using this, you should name everything within uppercase. It's just a matter of taste. So in this case, I'm gonna say pure component and then pure component, right? And this one, it's gonna be pure comp. Good, all right. So now I need to create a route. So I'm gonna go at the top and pretty much do the same that the other ones. So this one is going to be pure comp from that / components, and then of course pure comp. All right. So I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to go at the bottom make a new route, and this one it's pure comp, whatever, and pure comp. All right, so I'm gonna copy the conditional and go at the bottom, and the route it's pure comp, and the component it's pure comp. All right, so if I reload the application and I go to pure comp, we get pure comp. Okay, that's good. Let me just reload the page. That's okay. So I'm gonna go to pure comp and let me make some space. And this is what we're gonna do. First, I'm gonna give you the prompt. Let's say that I have a state, and this state it's equal to something that gets a name, and this name is gonna be Francis, right? That's it. Let me. I'm gonna select everything and do a format selection, and it's gonna format just a little bit. So on the render, every time I render this component, I want to get a console log on the screen so I can know that this is rendering. All right. So if I reload the application, of course, we get one render because this is rendering one time, right? Makes sense. We can know this. So now I'm going to go to the return and I'm going to return that name. So I'm going to say h3 and I'm going to make a reference to that state that name, right? So if we reload the screen, we get Francis and we render only one time. All right. So now what I want to do, I want to add a button. And this button, the only thing it's going to do is going to change the name of the user. So I'm going to say click to change. Right, I'm going to go at the bottom. I'm going to create the event. So on click, and this one is going to be equal to a function, and we're going to trigger the change from here. I'm going to say this.set state, open and close, and I'm going to change the name to Steve. All right. We know this. So far, nothing new. So I'm going to reload the application. We get Francis and we get render, right? So if I click to change, we're going to change this to Steve and we're going to get one more render because the application will detect the change on the state and it will re-render the application. So I'm going to click to change, we get Steve and we get one more render. Okay, so now I'm going to go here and change the state to the same value. So I'm going to change it to Francis, right? Again, I know it makes no sense, but I'm going somewhere. So if I click change, of course, we are updating the state to Francis, but again, we are not really changing anything because we already have Francis. But the application still renders twice. So what is the point in re-rendering the application, redoing everything when the value, it's pretty much the same? It's just pointless. So if we think about this, makes no sense. Now let's say that we want to fix this behavior. If we are updating something, and the value, it's pretty much the same, I don't want to re-render the application. So since now we can know Lifecycles, we can use a should component update and catch it and decide if we want to re-render or not. So I'm gonna go to that example. I'm gonna say, all right, if we have the next state, let me just bring it at the top. We get next and then the props, and then we get next and then we get the next state. All right. If on the next state dot and I access the name is completely equal to whatever we have on the that state, that name, right? If the updated value it's equal to the one we already have, of course we are going to return false on this one. We are not going to re-render the application. Of course, if this scenario, this rule gets no match, we're going to return true and we will update. So of course we reload the application. I'm going to click to change. And we are triggering the set state, but the application will not re-render. Now, if I change it to something else like Steve, of course, this rule will not be matched, and we will be re-rendering twice and changing the value. Again, I know that we know this. We've been doing this, so we can know. So again, maybe you know that this is going to happen in your application, and you don't want to update or re-render the application every time the value is changing to pretty much the same value. You're not getting new state and you're not really getting a new prop. So instead of just doing this, right, what you can do, and let me just comment this, instead of bringing a component, you get an additional type of component which works pretty much the same. That's called pure component. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste it. Now, of course, we are pretty much doing the same thing than before. So if we reload the application, everything works. Now, if I click to change, we are changing to Steve and we change the render. Now, what happens if I change it to Francis again? let me go right here and say, let me just copy and paste Francis. All right. So I'm going to reload the application. I'm going to click to change, and we are, updating the state, but we are not re-rendering the application. And this is what the pure component does. It's going to kind of do all this should component update logic for us. I told you this is really, really simple, but again, there's always a lot of confusion of what this does. And this is what it does. It gets kind of a built-in should component update for your values on the state or props. And that's it. It will decide for you if you really need to re-render. And of course, it will re-render only if you have new values. And that's it. All right. Okay, that's good. So let's go to the next section. We're going to talk about something else to the next video. All right, so as for the latest versions of React, we are allowed to directly return an array on render. So this is something that we could not do with React 15 or, less than 15. But with the 16th and on, we can do it. So first, let me show you what we can do. I'm going to go to the posts.js because we get nothing pretty much. So I'm going to do it here, not to, of course, add a new route, because this is going to be pretty simple. So, okay, so first what we need to do, I just need to create an array. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to create a const called IDs, and this one, it will be equal to just an array. So this one is going to be an array that will get an ID, let's say 1, then I'm going to say, I don't know, comma, and we will get a name for this one, and this one is going to be post1, whatever. And of course, since this is an array, I need to add a couple of things. So this one is going to be 2, this one is going to be 3, and same thing on the other ones. So 2 and 3, right? Okay, so we get just a valid array. So now in the past, we could not return the array right here. So since what I want to do, I want to render a list with the divs and spans and everything else. What I can do, of course, I could just make a reference to maybe a function. Let me just do it right here at the bottom. So I'm going to create a variable called list, and this one is going to enter the IDs and it's going to map them, right? So again, the map, what it does, it returns an array. So on each iteration, we will get access to the item, and at the end, we will return some JSX. So what are we going to do? Well, in this case, I'm going to create maybe a span with a, we need a key. So I'm going to do key, open and close. And this one is going to be the item.id. Remember, we do have an ID. And then inside, maybe this one is going to be a link. I don't know. So let me just import link just to make it a little bit more real. So link from React router DOM. And what we will be returning is just, a link. So I'm going to say link, open and close. So we need the 2. So I'm going to say 2, open and close. And this one is going to be going to, I don't know, to item dot ID, whatever. And this one, of course, is going to be the name. So item dot name. That's it. Again, nothing new. So now what I want to do, I want to return a div, or maybe a fragment with a reference to that list. So we're going to say list. So if I save this, of course, let me go to posts. We're going to get the links. Let me do divs instead of span, so we can get a little bit better. So of course, we get a list with 3 different links. All right, so we know that works. Now with the new version of React, just like I told you, instead of just creating a function just to render everything, what we can do now is just copy this, remove this, and just render or return the map. Now again, remember that this one returns an array. So we can return an array directly. So really, really cool stuff. And again, this one, it's from 16 on. If you're using an old version of React, not gonna happen. All right. So what else? What else we can do? Again, this one returns just an array. So instead of doing this, what we could do, we can do something like this. Let's say that we want to return, and I want to return an array. So this one is going to say hello, then maybe I am a and space, and I don't know, something dumb, React app, whatever. So if we render, we get hello, I am a React app, let me to space. So again, we can return divs directly. And again, this could be something that you could use. Maybe let's say that this is a functional component and you're going to get an array as props, right? You get the parent component, maybe index, will send a prop with an array. And instead of doing all of this logic, maybe you just can return, props and the array, the ID for the array. So, right now we are just maybe returning some text. What happens if I do dips? So let me go here and say I want to create a div, and I'm gonna chop it and put it at the end. So I'm gonna put it right here. Of course, you don't need to do this. I'm just showing you. So we're gonna say a div, and then we close it with a div. Now, of course, this is still an array, so we need to do comma and comma. And if we render, we kind of get it. We still get it because, again, this is just an array. So we still get the error of the key that we are not getting. So what you could do, again, you can add the property right here. Key. This one is going to be 1, and of course the other ones. This one is going to be 2, and this one is going to be 3, of course. All right, man. So pretty simple stuff. I know that this is pretty dumb, but I kind of need to show you because maybe in the future you will go to the web, try to find an example on someone else's code, and they are doing this, and you're gonna say, "What the hell is this?" I didn't know about this. All right. So again, now you know. Now on the next one, we're gonna go to something that it's not that simple. It's a little bit weird to understand, but it's something that you will use the whole time, at least once in your application. We're gonna talk about HOCs, which is high order components. So let's go to the next one and learn HOCs. Right, so now we're gonna talk about HOCs. So these are high order components. So this one gets, are a little bit hard to understand by developers because we don't understand where to use it or, why to use it. So we get different approaches to HOCs. So I'm going to go to profile.js. I'm going to do things pretty much here because if not, I would have to go and create a new route, and I don't want to. So I'm going to create profile because this is kind of the perfect spot to do it. So first, I'm going to show you different ways in how we can use HOCs. So let's assume that the content that we are returning right here uses markup. Let's say that we want to add a template, right? Right, so this template, it's something that we're going to use pretty much in all the application. So instead of just going right here and doing all the template manually, every time we want to render that kind of template, we can create an HOC, right? So I'm going to go to components and create a new directory called HOC. Now I'm going to go and say that I'm going to create a new file, that this is the cart HOC. Now, in real life, you can do whatever you want. You can put an HOC and then say cart underscore HOC, or, I've seen different ways of doing this. Now, of course, this one, what it's going to do is just going to return a function, or maybe you could return a class, whatever you want. In this case, I just need to create a React stateless component. And I'm going to do something like this. Sorry, I was React class-based component or functional component. There we go. And all right, so we're gonna just return a function that's called cart, right? Just a component. So let me make it the way I want. Export. Then we're gonna return cart, and this one it's gonna be a cart. So const. Let me just do it just like this. It's gonna be const cart. I was using the plugin, but I much like this way. All right. So right now we are just returning something that says cart, right? I'm gonna delete this and just leave it the way it is. All right. Okay. Now what I want to do, I want to of course return something, and this something will have a style. So I'm gonna go at the top and say that I will create a const called style, and this style will contain a background of I don't know, light gray, something like that. All right, it's just a class, just a style. All right, so now on the cart, what I want to do, I just want to return the div. So I'm going to say return, open and close, and I'm going to return a div. So this div will have a style, and the style is going to say style pretty much. Now I'm going to add a class name, maybe called I don't know, cart, whatever. Now inside, what I'm going to be returning is the props.children. So I'm going to say props and then children. We know that what we can do with props and children. So right now, of course, we're going to receive props. All right. So the only thing that this component does is going to return div, and inside whatever component we get inside props. right? All right, pretty simple. We've done this. Now I'm gonna go to profile, and I'm gonna delete this. Maybe you don't need it. Of course, this one was pretty simple. So I could just delete this. I'm gonna just delete it. All right. And inside, again, I'm gonna just leave it empty. So now, of course, we're gonna use that cart HOC. So first, in order to use it, we need to import it. So this one is gonna be cart from that / and we get HOCs / and we get the cart component. So this profile component, the only thing it's gonna do is gonna return maybe, hello guys. That's it. Now, of course, if I go to profile, we get hello guys, and that's good. All right. So now what I want to do, I want to return this component, but with the cart container, the cart style, that light gray background. So what we can do, we can go right here, bring that cart component and wrap it right here. And of course, when we this returns, we get that, the template. And that's it. This is actually an HOC. I know that we can do this. I'm going to show you several ways of doing this, and it's going to get much complicated in the next few minutes. But this is one way of using HOCs. Maybe you have a section that you're going to be returning, and you're going to be using several times. So why doing that section every time you want to return something with the same type of styles, or maybe components or whatever? So you're going to create a container. That container will return whatever you have inside with that same style, and you just import it and wrap the component. So this is what essentially a high order component is a component that returns the content that you have inside wrapped in something else. That's it. That's it. We don't need to complicate things. Of course, we get other ways to use HOCs. So let me just show you. So let's pretend that since this is the profile section, the user needs to be authenticated in order, of course, to move forward to this section. Now, of course, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go, of course, to HOCs and create a new HOC for this. And this one is going to be auth. Let me do it again. I was kind of searching for this. New file, and this one is going to be auth.js. Now, we pretty much need to do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy all of this and paste it on the auth. That's it. I'm going to change it to auth. And I'm going to change this one to auth again. And I kind of don't need this. I'm going to delete it again and delete the style. That's it. All right. So of course, let's say that when we enter to profile, I need to check if the user is authenticated. Of course, the user will have a password and everything else. So we're going to, of course, fake it right here. In real life, you're going to go to a server or maybe check the tokens that you have on the local storage or something like that. In this case, we're going to do something simple. So I'm going to create a variable that's called password. So if the password is equal to, password 123, we're going to let the user move forward. If not, of course, we are not going to let the user move forward. So I'm going to say if, open and close. That's it. That's the only thing I'm going to do. I'm going to say if and else. So if the pass, it's triple equal to whatever we get right here, of course, we're going to let the user, move forward. So in this case, we're going to say that return. And we're gonna, of course, return the prompts the children, right? Prompts the children. Now, of course, if the password is incorrect, instead of doing this, we're gonna say that, you are not out, whatever. Now, instead of just using the conditional rendering on the actual component, we can bring this auth that would, of course, go to the server and do all the checking, and then we'll return the component that we want to render, or it's going to show something else. So in this case, I need to import it at the top. So I'm going to say import auth. Let me do it correctly. Auth from ./HOC, and we're going to bring auth. So now, of course, you can wrap whatever component, whatever content you get right here with the auth, and that auth will check the password for us and let the user pass or not. Of course, let me make it a little bit better. So, okay, I'm going to reload the application, and we do get the hello guys because the passwords are correct. So if I delete this and reload the application, we get the you're not auth. All right. So this is another way of using HOCs, maybe to check some values or prompts or whatever it is that you want to do. And if it's correct or something else, you're going to let the user pass, or you will not let user pass. And this HOC with the alf, it's really popular. You're going to use it the whole time. Same thing with the template. So these HOCs are kind of really simple to understand. We are just returning the props.children. Now this is the most common approach. Then you have other type of HOCs that are a little bit more complicated to understand. So we're going to discuss it on the next section. Okay, so let's expand a little bit more about HOCs. And on this one, I really need a new component. Really need a new route. So I'm going to create a new route called user. That's it. Maybe user, could be users. I'm going to just call it user. Now this is going to be just a React stateless, actually functional component. All right. So of course we're going to use the export default function. So I'm going to copy all of this. I'm going to export default. I'm going to call it user. And on this one, I'm going to say user, and I'm going to create a const called user that will be, the usual stuff. All right. And on this one, I'm just going to return user. I'm going to select everything and format selection. Right. Just a functional component. Now, of course, we need to add the route. So I'm going to go at the top. I need to import, and it's going to be user and then comp with a capital C from that / components. And we're going to bring user. And of course, just like before, we need to put a reference to this so we can access that route. And this one, I'm going to call it, of course, maybe user comp. Why not? User comp. And of course, let me do user comp. And I'm going to add the route. I'm sorry for this, but we really need to do this. You're going to see in a minute. So we're going to render the user comp whenever we go to that route. All right. So if we go to user comp, we get user. All right, cool. Now I'm going to close pretty much everything. And I'm going to open the user one more time. All right. So now what I want to do, I want to create an HOC for the user. Now I'm going to do it first. It's going to be very weird for you if you don't know this. And then I'm going to explain you. Don't panic. So I'm going to go HOC. I'm going to say user.js. All right, this is my user HOC. Now we need to do the usual. I'm not going to use the other one. I'm going to import React from React, right? And I need to do user and then HOC. Could be whatever. Now this one will be getting some props, and then at the end we're going to return something. What we're going to get as props is something called wrapped and then component. I know that it's already, everything really weird. And then I'm going to get an argument called arg1. Now this one, what it's going to do is going to return with props, and it's going to return some JSX. I know, weird. So we're going to get props, and when we return the JSX, what I want to return is a div, and inside we're going to put the wrapped component. So let me make a reference to that. All right, and I'm going to close it. And then at the end, what do? We export default, and then we export default user HOC. I know that this looks weird. Don't panic. I'm going to explain you in a minute. Now on the user.js, of course, we need to import that HOC. So import user HOC, and it's going to be from that / HOC. We're going to bring the user, and at the very end, I'm going to go to the export default. But instead of putting the user, I'm going to say user HOC. I'm going to pass the user as an argument. I'm going to do comma and do hello I am. And that's it. Now, if I go to the application, reload it, this is still working. You're getting these warnings from different sections. Let me get rid of them. I'm going to go to profile, and it says that we are using link. We are not using it. What else? Posts.js. So sorry for this. You have done this in different sections. So post header is defined. Not anymore. Link, we are not using it. What else? We get posts.js. So I'm going to go and say the ID is assigned a value. Of course, I'm going to comment this one. All right. So we can see that, this one still works. So, how in the hell is this one working? What are we doing here? So let me just explain you in steps what's happening right here. All right, so what is happening right here? So when we go to this route and we try to render whatever we have on this route, we are saying, dude, go to that component, which is this one, the user component. So, we are rendering this. Well, not really. When we go to this route, we are telling the application that we need to export default the user HOC. So the only thing we are doing here is just creating a component called user. But what really comes out on the screen is whatever we have inside user HOC, right? Okay. Now this user HOC, it's using two arguments, the user and the hello I am. And this one is just a string. But what we are passing as an argument is the component that we are creating right here. Not exporting, not rendering. We are just creating a component and telling the application we need to render the user HOC. All right. So, again, what it's really happening is that we, instead of rendering this, we render this, right? We are using rendering the HOC. All right. Now, inside of the HOC file, the job of this user HOC is to graph and render whatever we are getting as an argument. So this is the wrapped component. This is a reference to the component we created on the, on this file. So again, what we are doing right here, the only job is to return this. So this user HOC is just a function that returns a function. And what happens is that function, it's returning some JSX, right? This is a function that returns JSX. So ultimately what we get is, of course, the user component, because we are passing this as a component. So again, this is just a function that returns a function that returns JSX. That is it. Now what's confusing is this props. Of course, if I remove props right here, save it, we are still getting the component because it's just a function that returns a component. The only difference is that we are passing the component we want to render here as an argument. Now remember that we need to return a function. If we try to do something like this, like we were using just a functional component on React, we're going to get an error message. It says expect a string or class or function for composite components. So this is a composite component. We are passing a component. We are wrapping everything with a function that returns, something else. So we need to return right here class or function. So that's why we do this. With this one, we are returning a function that returns a component, right? Now, of course, I'm going to go back to the other one. I'm going to say props. So again, what you can do, and it's really, really cool, is that you can pass multiple things. Let's say that this file has a lot of things right here, variables or something that comes from the server, whatever, doesn't matter. You just get a lot of things. So you can pass them all. We can pass all of these things as arguments, and you will get them right here. Now, since this is a function that just returns some components, some HTML or JSX in this case, you can, make a reference to that argument. It's just an argument, and it will get rendered right here. You could also, before the return, you could grab that component that you have right here, put it in a variable. I don't know, let's just call it value, and say that this one it's equal to arg1. Let's pretend that, of course, this is a function that is going to do a lot of things. And then at the end, you just want to return that inside of, whatever is that you're rendering, right? This is another way to do it. Now, the weird thing right here are the props. Let me just fix it, props. So we know that, of course, when we are using a route, we get a lot of props coming from React Router. And of course, we could use it. Now, if you're using a component that's not really related, it's not related directly with React Router, we can use with Router, to get all of that. We could do that. But the thing is that, again, when the application starts, we are not really getting props. So let me just prove it. I'm going to say props, and on this one, I'm going to say console.log, and then using props. All right, so I'm going to reload the application, and we get an empty object. And then again, this makes sense, because when we render this screen, we are not really showing this. The one that it's getting, the router props, is going to be the user HOC. Remember, this one is the one that it's really rendering on screen. So if I do console log props, we are just not getting props. And this, might be a problem, because sometimes this component will get other props, maybe from the parent, not maybe from React Router, maybe from a different thing, maybe a class or whatever. And you really need to grab these props and to work with the props inside of the component. So this is the a bummer, because you really need the props, and how can you pass the props? So if I save this and go delete this and go to the user HOC, this is the one that it's really getting the props. So if I do console, let me just do it correctly. If I do console.log and then I do props, I'm getting the props from React Router. So again, we are getting it on the one that it's really rendering for the first time. Of course, if I remove the props right here, let me just delete this one as well. If I delete the props, we are not getting anything. So this is why we return a function. If this one, which is the one that it's really rendering for the first time, gets props, we are catching the props right here. And what we can do, we can of course do something with those props inside of the actual user HOC, and that's why we get it. Now, most of the times you want the props right here. You want to use the props on this component and maybe not on this one. Notice that on this one we are using the props outside of the wrapped component, right? So what you can do, of course, you can grab those props. Let me just remove this. Of course, we cannot comment. What you can do is you can do open and close, ... and whatever you get as props will be injected on the wrapped component. So if I go now to here and say console log and I console log the props, we are getting whatever we get from React Router. The only thing that we are getting, it's that we are not, of course, getting the props directly on this component. We are rendering this that grabs the props and injects the props on the actual component. Now again, another cool thing that you can do right here with this one, with this method, is that you might have different components, and all of these components will be rendered by the user HOC. And it kind of makes sense because the only thing we are doing is creating the component. We are not rendering the component here. So what I can do, I just can create a different function called user, user, and then let me do it correctly, user 2, whatever. And this one, it's pretty much like this one, but it's gonna say user 2. All right, let me delete the console logs so I can make it a little bit better. And this one is gonna be the user 2. Now, since what we are doing, we are creating the component and we are passing as an argument, what we could do, we can pass a second argument of user 2 and then include the components right here. So now what we get on the second argument, it's not the arg1, it's gonna be the wrap component 2. And we could do pretty much the same thing, wrap component, open and close, and I'm gonna do the props as well. So I'm gonna paste it, and what we get is we get both components rendered on the same spot, right? Another cool thing we can get with this. Now, if you ask me how many times we're gonna use this, we're gonna do this, something like this, well, you're not gonna use it the whole time, of course not. Most of the times you're just gonna create a class-based component or maybe a functional component, and that's it. But the thing is that sometimes you will need this when you need to maybe create this example with the auth. Well, maybe you can create an auth file, an auth HOC, and that HOC will receive, everything that you need to receive, and then you will render the component after you do the check for the user authorization. Now, of course, we're gonna do this on this course. We're gonna do it, of course, when we get to the auth logic of things and we get kind of a real authentication with the server and everything else. We will use an HOC just like this one. All right, okay, that's good. I don't need to complicate things. We're gonna learn this in a more practical way in the future. But right now, we're gonna go to a different section called transitions.